To have a good harvest, one must plant good seeds and must also use the right kind of fertilizer. The carrots have grown large and firm. How good they will taste.
Well, good morning, everybody. Yep, top of the morning to you. Welcome back to the Backyard Gardens podcast. I'm here with Miss Batavia, and I am your host, Young Ben. That's right, I own it now. And it's because I am that cool. Just that cool. Just joking.
Always taking it too far.
It is taking it too far, but that's okay. There's a question that comes to mind that for me was really hard to get an answer for. And I have a really hard time. We're going to have to get Leonard on the title on this one. But it's basically, what are we going to plant after X crop? So as we transition over, you've harvested something, you're thinking about companion and combative planting. What do we put in next behind that crop? And this is for intensive planting too. So a lot of times we get a spring garden and then bam, we go right into a summer garden. I mean, have you had problems with this, Batavia? Have you had any luck figuring it out? What's going on with you?
Not only am I a member of the group that has problems, I may be the president. This is, especially for me, as each year I'm trying to be more intentional about going from spring, summer, and fall, gardening in all three seasons. This has probably been the most difficult piece of that journey. Yes, folks, right. It's a journey.
Yeah, I looked high and low, and there are some crops that I could find answers to, but then there's some that weren't. And then as I started digging deeper, I found some answers and figured out, I don't know 100%, but a good way to look at it, I can say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Not in addition to, crop rotation and combative plants and companion planting, there's also, seed to harvest time. And then you add that to what time you have left in your season. Right. So you fold that bit in because everything doesn't grow equally for every day of the growing season. Does that make sense?
It does.
Yeah. Okay. I worked that out in my head. And
at least to me, it makes sense. Maybe hopefully to the listener, it does too. But before we get started, if you want to support the show, buy some seeds from us. We have a link below. Use the code not 10%. Use the code 1,000,000. And you will get 10% off and a free pack of seeds. And we're also working on getting fall seeds in time for fall seed starting. So be prepared for that as well. And also, you can become a subscriber. Links are below. All the other stuff, Amazon list, blah, blah, blah. Check them all out. Help support the show. Because of you and you guys clicking the links, that's what keeps us on the air. So thank you very, very much. There we go. That was a little overkill too, but I'll take it.
No, that was just me trying to express how much I agree and how important I think that message was without using the words I just used.
Okay, good. So, yeah. What is, have you had any failures with this in particular that you can pinpoint this is where the failure occurred?
Yeah, I was just looking at a video yesterday. I was looking at an older video of mine for a different purpose, and I saw a cabbage start. It was a transplant I had picked up, and the video aired at some point, I think in August, maybe early September, and I was somewhat hopeful that that plant did nothing that year. So there was no fall harvest. And then I extended my hope to say, well, maybe in the spring it will, it'll overwinter. And no, it didn't do any of that. So I think that was an empty space, no less. But it was what do I plant in this space now that I have it open?
Right.
And cabbage wasn't for that space at that time.
Right.
So yeah, that's an example.
Yeah, I've had this with a number of things. And I don't know if I can ever pinpoint it to a failure, but what it was when I was looking at companion and combative plantings and stuff like that, and really getting in the weeds about that, I started to get real nervous. And to me, that is just as bad as planting something wrong, because what it caused me to do is, number one, delay and just be really indecisive about what I was going to do. Yeah. And, there was some, like I said in the beginning, a whole 3 minutes ago, there were some simple methods that I've used to kind of deduce what should go in there, but it's overall, it can be complicated. And it's one of those things too, where we have to think about it, are we planting too much into our garden at the same time? Are we working our garden too hard?
I think so. That's definitely something that I try to keep in mind. I also think that if you're on a second planting, whether it's the same crop or in a lot of cases we're talking about a different crop, I think sometimes we're not as genuine in the planting. So we don't give it like our best go, because we've already gotten food out of that space to start the season or wherever you are in the season. And so now it's that second thing. We're not as conscious. So if I go back to that cabbage example, it's in a space that's behind the porch later in the season, the sun's lower in the sky. I know these things, right? I knew that it was a shadier spot, so it wasn't going to get the best of, my garden in order to produce. And so it's almost like there's a little bit of a cheat going on. Like, let me see if I can squeeze this thing in. Let me see if it produces. And it was a waste of water and fertilizer.
Yeah.
But to that, and something that's going to be in a theme in this episode, it was a lesson that I learned that fall, again, that spring. And now I can remember that, and I won't make that particular misstep again.
Yeah, it's, man, there's so much there, as you would say, there.
There's more of a pause when I say it. Yeah. There's like, it creates that anticipation, and then the second there lands. So just
there's so much there. Yeah, it's too much pause.
Oh,
too much pause.
We can work on it after the show.
Yeah, we'll work on it later. But I mean, the whole failing part of it, I think, is really important. And that's why in the wintertime we do, this is what we struggled with, our failures for the year, because that's what catapults us to the next level of gardening, if you choose so to take that challenge. And this is, how we did it in our gardens too. So I can tell you that one thing that I learned over the year, last year was the year that I really last year was like a pivotal year in my gardening life, I think. A lot of things came to head last year. I planted potatoes, and they have a long season. No, I don't want to say they have a long season. They have an odd season. They go in early, and then they come out in like prime season, It's like, I think I put them in February or March, and I pulled them out in June. And so it's like, well, what do you do after June?
Yeah.
And there was multiple things I could have done, but I went the safe approach. And I thought, and this is, this would be the safe approach, where you do your harvest, and then in the middle of everybody's favorite season, I let that bed sit empty, and I didn't plant anything in it, because my goal was to plant Brussels sprouts behind it. And there's a way that I came up with this idea. Oh, I just got a comment that's pretty funny. The way I came up with this idea was, what nutrients do the plants use? And what goes in after it? So that's kind of where I landed with that. And so, Brussels sprouts use a lot of nitrogen. Potatoes don't use a lot of nitrogen. So that was kind of my thought process. Have you thought about it like that at all?
Actually, so the comment that I was clicking on send, because I thought you were getting to the end of your point, so you can then read it as I was talking, but my timing wasn't on. So I literally just recently released a video where I'm talking about spring going into summer, going into fall, and I skipped all of the comments about my fall plantings, but it's the rationale between, why I'm planting, sweet peas and growing lettuce, and then followed by the main crop in that small space is going to be sweet corn. Right. And so then the question becomes, what, if anything, can you get in after that for fall? So Now, the important part is I didn't make any considerations around the needs of the lettuce and the peas, and then kind of going into summer planting for corn, right? Because I don't necessarily look at the lettuce and the peas as heavy feeders. And to be quite honest, there are only a handful of crops that I really focus on that. And I also fold in the amount of time it's in my garden, right? So there's nothing I've read that says this, but things that get in and out of my garden, I kind of feel like those are freebies, so to speak. It's like, I bend the rules when it comes to crop rotation around those things. Like broccoli is a good example. It's going to be in and out of my beds. And I'm just like, the garden didn't even realize 90 days had passed and it got in and out,
Yeah, because I was doing a video the other day and I was talking about my peppers, and I was like, they're going to be in the ground for 6 months. And then I stopped and thought about it, and I was like, that's crazy. 6 months of that plant in the ground, versus, and when you said broccoli, I almost scoffed at you, but I had to sit back and think like, that is in and out, like radishes. I don't rotate radishes because I have so many things planted in that place. But before then, it's 20 days.
Something like tomatoes. And to be quite frank, I feel like in the future, so I'm speaking to future Batavia and future listeners that will listen to what future Batavia says about how past Batavia was right. I think I lost myself in that thought. I feel like there's going to be a time in the future where my tomatoes come out earlier than they are now. And we've talked about this just a tinge, but generally my tomatoes are in the ground until the frost. Right. So I give myself a pass for a tomato bed. If I'm planting tomatoes in a bed, I don't have anything planned after that. Right. And there's actually some sense of relief there. Like my brain doesn't have to calculate what's next. Right. But I do believe there, and to be quite frank, there are two reasons why I would say there's a future version of me where my tomatoes come out earlier. It's just coming to the realization that the investment is no longer returning anything for me, right? There's the end of the season. They're not putting out as much. And I've lost the window to actually get something in behind it if I leave them in there, right? So I'm not mature enough as a gardener to put that into the work. I don't expect to do that this year, but know that that's my logic. That's where my head is at. So there are peppers and there are tomatoes. Those are probably the two crops that are generally going to be in my garden from the point they plant it from the point I plant them to the point I put the garden to bed. But that's not my full garden. So there are a lot of other spaces that it's like, okay, how do you get the most out of it? And are there crops that you just don't want any more of, right? So then what do you put in next? I don't feel like everything we plant, we have to consume it until it dies. Like it's okay to say I'm moving on from this.
Yeah, I have a hard time pulling plants that are still producing. It sounds weird, but if it's healthy and it's still producing, I don't like to pull it. But what I do is I factor that into my plan, and then like my tomatoes will stop producing. No problem pulling them.
Yeah.
So I've kind of built myself a crutch around those feelings for me. But if I have potatoes that are constantly producing, like I have a really hard time pulling them. That being said, I will pull them, but it's just a hard time.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I'm not the queen of pulling either. I think also it's the healthy part, because sometimes we spend a lot of time focusing on what's not healthy and what do you do there. So who dare pull a plant that's healthy? Now, to me, healthy is there's no issues with the plant, but it doesn't mean that it's productive. Those are really two different things. Yeah. So I've seen healthy eggplants that have basically stopped producing. They look to be healthy. Let me say that.
Yeah. I have no problem pulling an eggplant. I get tired of eating them. Yeah, they get old quick. It's funny. Everybody I know too. I'm like, you want any eggplants? And they're like, I don't know how to use them. I'm like, yeah, I hear you. There's only a couple ways, but
every season I try to give away the actual fruit, the eggplant itself, and same thing.
Yeah, you might as well be standing up front and juggling them. You'd be better off. Yeah. So in your garden, like especially like focusing on this season, like what's one crop that you are confident in planting after another crop? Like what's the crop you're planting after, and what is the one that's in the ground now?
So I think any leafy green after potatoes, I generally feel good about because those plants don't. The leafy green, and again, I'm not talking about, I didn't say it before, so it's not again. I'm not talking about heading crops. So I'm talking about your arugulas, your lettuce, your chard, like, even your kale, those kinds of leafy greens, I'm really confident around because I'm sometimes pulling potatoes out in August, right? So I'm going into a fall planting for those.
And do you plant right away after that?
I always want to.
Yeah.
But this is the reason why this conversation is important right in this moment. I never really give it that forethought. There are two things that I struggle with every year to plant after: garlic, at least two things, garlic and potatoes. You
struggle to plant after because of the timing?
Well, this is the session here. We're working through this, young Ben.
Oh, okay. So we're doing that. We're playing this game.
I believed that it was the timing of it. I still feel that way, but I'm wondering if there's a little bit of something else there. So I'm pulling out garlic in some point in July. On a good year, early July. Potatoes could be the heat of summer. So, later in July, based on when I plant them, even August. And so those that presents a different set of problems. The July time frame, still feels like summer. I could get summer crops in. The August time frame feels like you need to be focused on fall, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, the way I would look at this is like, what do we know about garlic? We know that we feed it a lot of nitrogen. So therefore, it is a pretty nitrogen hungry plant. We know that it doesn't have a lot of pest issues. So that's good. That means that there should not be any lingering pests in the soil or anything like that. And we also have to factor in the time frame in which you pull it out. So let's say you pull it out on July 15th and your last frost date or your first frost date is October something, right? November 1. So you got a couple months to get that something in the ground. I don't see a problem planting right behind it, but this is where the fertilizer conversation that we had a couple weeks ago really comes into play, because that's something that's going to prop that plant up and give it what it needs to get going the next one. And I think where you are, you should be good to plant like cabbages or something like that. But again, with it going into fall, those are really hard crops to grow. So nitrogen hungry plants, there's a lot of them. So I would be looking at like turnips and rutabagas and radishes and, carrots maybe.
So my plan currently has carrots behind the garlic. Now, this is where we're probably at number 5 for me when it comes to the considerations, companions, combatants, how to feed them, how much time you have left. So the 5th one would be, where is that plant at that you're pulling and what's around it now?
Yeah.
Right. So I have 3 spaces for garlic this year, and one of them is in a pretty good space where it's going to get almost full sun. So whatever I plant after it is going to be in the front yard garden. It's going to have a really good opportunity to soak up that sun. The other 2 spaces are underneath the trellis. So the beauty in that at the beginning of the season is the trellis is empty. And so it gives all of that energy, sun's energy, to the to the garlic. When I pull that garlic out, there's going to be a lot of shading. So I have carrots there, which my hope is that it benefits me by planting carrots in July, sowing seeds in July, right? That's my hope. But
right,
I don't know for that particular space if that's going to be the case. Only time will tell.
Yeah, and I mean, because it's so late, it's I don't think you can get another like a determinate tomato in or something. No. They typically, it's recommended behind onions and garlic to plant tomatoes. Typically, it's recommended that way. So, but you have so little time. And now, if you had a nice transplant, like a fairly decent sized one, you could be singing a different tune. But you don't really want to go down that path. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think So, and this is where you try different things until you figure out what really works in your space.
Yeah.
So 2 years ago, I think I planted garlic in a bed in the backyard, and it's going to get as much sun as any other bed in the backyard garden. And then I put turnips and lettuce behind it.
Yeah.
And that was in July. So I would like planted one right on top of the other, which is probably the closest I've ever done. And the turnips started to not bolt, but they started to get, a bigger size. They were affected by the heat. Let me say that. And so that's one of those things to consider. Like I could have harvested those turnips much smaller. They would have been much more enjoyable, but that's not a time of the year to kind of let the turnips to get, the largest size that you really have ever seen turnips, right? Again, you kind of have to balance those things out. Lettuce did okay. Right. Again, it's July seeded lettuce. So there's that. I think that these are all viable crops when it comes to what you're planting. I could have done, and we talked about this for last year, which I didn't do. I could have done some bush beans if I would have been right on it, and I think those would have produced. So there are definitely some options, but I think you can't be figuring out the plan once you pull the crop when it comes to this.
No.
You got to know going in. That's your best chance.
You can have an idea, but you're right. You've got to really think about it and have an understanding about like, hey, this is what's going on. This is what I need to do. And I mean, the beauty of it too with gardening is it doesn't happen really fast. Nothing happens really fast. So you definitely have time, but that's also the struggle too, because like, I got time. Yeah. So last year, I did sweet potatoes in one bed, and then I followed them with broccoli. And the broccoli it got smoked by the heat. And I don't know if it was the heat. I don't know if it was planting behind the sweet potatoes. There just wasn't enough in the soil. I don't know what it was. But I'm leaning more towards the heat. But this is part of my process where I have to look at it and say, okay, broccoli's nitrogen hungry, sweet potatoes aren't. This was Leonard just sent me a message. This was in August that I did it.
Yeah,
so
August in North Carolina, yeah.
August Carolina.
August anywhere in the U.S. is pretty hot.
Yeah, it's kind of the end of it, and so they don't share pests and they don't share nutrients. And that's where my go was like, okay, well, this is going to work out well. But it never really took. And I did get a couple heads out of it, but it just wasn't much. This was my early broccoli in the fall. My spring broccoli is a different story, but more than that in the future. So, it's kind of one of those things where it's like, I'm not totally convinced, but I think there may be a little bit of two things happening. Same with, I'm trying to think now, what else did I do? I did onions, then I followed them with potatoes, and then I followed them with tomatoes with a T. Then I followed them with bok choy and lettuce and radishes, and all those did really well, just in succession. So March was the potatoes. Nope, I take that back. November was the onions. And then June, onions came out, tomatoes went in. In April, late April, I took cuttings off of tomatoes and made more starts so they'd be ready. I rooted them, I propagated them, put those in. They grew. I didn't get a huge harvest, but it was really, really hot again. But they did fine. And then I came back in October, maybe late September, and I took all the tomatoes out and I planted the lettuce, the bok choy, and the radishes. And I was eating all that up until March. So no, February, when I had to pull it up to plant my potatoes this year.
Yeah, and you don't stumble into that. Yeah,
no.
That's a beautiful thing. So I didn't count that, but what's that, like 6 different crops in the same space? In the exact same bed over, and I mean, you're talking a full year of planting, no break whatsoever. Yeah. Now, I don't think that I could do those 6 crops based on my Chicago weather. And I haven't given it enough thought to just, I don't want a knee-jerk reaction to be, I could never do 6 crops. But I do aspire to have more turnover in my bed. You know, like every retailer is out here like, more turnover. No, it's my work life creeping in. But I do aspire to have more turnover in my beds. And that's all dependent on, again, how disciplined I am with planting and harvesting. And if you go in between, watering, feeding, right? You know, maintenance, you know, pest management, all of that impacts your start point to your finish point. And then truly having a finish point. And then basically having a plan to say what's next, right? Yeah. You know, so plants that have a end of life, so to speak, when it comes to harvesting, those are the ones that give me the most challenge because, again, they're saying, all right, we're done. There's nothing else we're going to give. Onions, we're done. Now what? You know? And so I've just recently had success with onions, like actually getting up to the size that I want. Previous years, it's kind of been like, I'm still waiting on them to do something. Looking at them, you know. So now it's what do you put in after that? And this is where monocropping, I think, and we're using that term loosely, but y'all get it. Monocropping, you know, by bed helps, I think.
Yeah.
You know, versus you basically pulling out a crop here or there.
Yeah, that was the big thing is, you know, and last year was the year where I really tried, and this year I'm all in. Mm-hmm. Like, I'm all in on monocropping the beds. But with the potatoes, because, you know, growing a row of potatoes just doesn't excite me. Growing a whole bed of potatoes excited me. And so that's when I was like, I did that. And then once that was empty, the whole bed was empty all at once. I could put whatever I wanted in there. And so then it was time to kind of think about, okay, what's next? What's going in there next? And that's where the Brussels sprouts came in. So actually, I do want to go back to that same bed where I said I have potatoes in it now. And so I'm going to do exactly like I did last year where I'm going to put Brussels sprouts next. But in between those plant dates, which is about 8 weeks, I'm going to put buckwheat in there to revitalize the soil. Because at this point, I mean, I just went through it. And as I was saying it, I was like, wow, this is a lot. You know, and this is all part of making a plan. And so making a plan is really important. And this is where the planter app comes in. So you guys, we have a link below to get you a nice discount on the planter app. And when we talk about planning, it's because it is, I think, one of the most important things you can do for your garden and for yourself. You can come up with it. This is the time when you're going to learn. You can read about it. You can listen about it. You can watch about it. All these things. It's the planter app is great. It's got a drag and drop interface. It's all square foot. I'd actually, in the episode, remember when we were making our garden bed, and I said, it'd be nice if you could rotate. Well, I got a message from the creator, and he was like, oh, by the way, you can rotate those plants by tapping on them and then pushing that rotate icon. And the reason why I bring that up is because the app evolves so much that it's hard for me, because I get stuck in my ways. I'm like, I just want to look at it. But it's good to know that like that was a need and it was fixed. So you can use this to build out your gardens and visually look at it each year. And the reason why I'm bringing it up is because this is what helped me kind of figure out, because I put in plants and I was like, okay, what do I want to put in next? I want to put in potatoes and Brussels sprouts. Well, I put them in the same bed at the same time to see if they were combative or companions. And that was one way that I used the planter app for me to plant afterwards. So that's a really good way. So it's on Apple, Google Store, all that stuff. You can use it on your phone, PC, everything. Use the link below. It's the PLANTR app. ER app. So
two things. I absolutely use the companion planting recommendations as what do I plant afterwards.
Yes.
Right. You know, so my logic is if they can be planted together and grow well together, it should be no issue for me to plant the thing afterwards. So if I look at garlic, just a quick Google search, I could actually go to the planter app and look at garlic. A companion is spinach. A companion is potatoes. So those are two different things to consider for me. Spinach, if I pull my garlic out in July, is it too hot for spinach? Probably so. If I pull my garlic out in July, is it a long enough season for potatoes? I don't know. I don't know. I'm going to have to poke around and look at that. I think that the plan is super important, but I want to take it one step further. I made a garden goal of having my plan wrapped up about 6 weeks before the planting season started. Let me give you a spoiler for next year's goals episode. It ain't happening, right? I'm scratching that goal, not realistic, but let me tell you what is. Creating that plan and then speaking it out loud. So I recently did a video where I walked through for spring and summer what I just described. That's the reason why I knew that peas and lettuce were first, followed by corn. I walked through all of my garden and I realized, wait, this doesn't quite work. It's one of those things when you know how you say, like, you know, now that I hear it said out loud, it was absolutely that moment. And then I went back and made adjustments, and I feel great now about the plan. I felt good about it going in. It looked good on paper, but actually hearing my voice say the thing, if it's a voice note you're recording for yourself or a video you're actually doing, it doesn't matter. I believe there's value in actually hearing the words all said as you're walking through your garden. I had beans on the end of one of my beds as a trellis. As I said it out loud, as I looked at the space, I knew that that didn't work. I was apprehensive about it going in, but when I said it out loud and looked at the space, I said, nope, I'm going to have a hard time harvesting these. Don't even try it.
Did you see when I redid our garden from that day?
Yeah, I saw the second version.
Yeah, isn't that cool how just like I was able to fit everything? Dude, it took me forever to get our crazy garden to get put together, though, I'm going to tell you. But I pulled it up because I was looking at it and I was just kind of like glancing at it. If you want, it's on basically we posted it every social media we have. And you can see both versions of it. But as I pulled it up, I was looking at it and I'm thinking to myself, like, what crops come and go? Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like what we have here. So we've got, and if we go back to the plan, we've got basil and we've got corn and we've got zucchinis or squashes. You know, and even if you take the beans and you're like, look, they're bush beans, not green beans, then all of those, like there's a portion of those that can come and go. And I was thinking like, what would I put in behind it? You know, and I'm looking at these and I'm like, well, I think this is chard. Like you could put chard behind bush beans, you know, and actually that's a really good one too. I mean, you got your bush beans, you pull them up, you put a green behind them, you know.
Yeah, I think maybe that was a part of the original plan. It absolutely wasn't, but I'm going to, for my sake, say, I think that was a part of it, and that probably was my addition. Those are good plants. I think chard is like a filler plant. In my garden, at least it is, because it grows easily for me. Now, this is something that you have to keep in mind, and it seems obvious, but I want to...
Don't tell me what I have to do. I hate it.
This is what everyone besides young Ben has to keep in mind. And it sounds obvious, but I want you to say it. At least hear me when I say this. There's a lot of work that goes into what plays well together, what doesn't, what do I have enough space for, what should I be planting at this time of year, and then, you know, what should I be planting in the second and third season that I'm in as far as spring, summer, and fall. And you gotta keep in mind how much you want to eat of that thing. So when I saw the second version of this plan, I said, dang, that's a lot of corn. Then I actually realized, like, so we'd become a family of 5, right? No, 4. We'd be a family of 4. You,
no, dude, that's only
Kelly, David, and me.
2,
this is
3,
what this
4.
garden plan was.
That's 20 ears of corn, though. That's not much. And that's what
I realized. And I'm like, oh, we'd go through that in no time, you know. I'm a lover of corn. I don't talk about it a lot, but I love it.
That's me. That's a me and you garden only. We were going to live off that garden, 2 people. We'd go through that corn in a week.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's nothing.
But my point is, don't get lost in the technical bits of this, you know, like what's the best thing that goes after it and so on and so forth. I feel like sometimes I have planted the thing that I'm interested in for sure. I've never planted anything that I just knew I didn't like, but I'm interested in it for sure. And it made sense in my garden. And then I realized kind of, you know, that next year I look back and say, I could have done with a little bit less of it. Yeah. You know, and so I just keep that garden version of yourself on your shoulder and balance that thing out. Because it's great to grow a lot of things, but if there are things that you're not really truly enjoying, it's kind of like a few years ago, and I still do this. I hate shopping for clothes. I hate shopping for shoes. I have to try on almost everything. I mean, stretchy pants, that's, it's a different world. That's a lot of what I wear now. But beyond that, I committed to, when I try a thing on, only buying it if I love it. Like I can look at myself and say, I love it. Doesn't matter what size I am. Doesn't matter what the event is that I'm buying it for or the occasion. Like, do I really feel good about it? Because I've bought clothes that are more so for function before, and there's no joy in that.
Right.
So now if you look at your garden, like you're looking at things now, you got 12 crops here. It doesn't mean you have to absolutely love everything, but maybe that influences the quantity you grow of the thing. Just because it's a companion doesn't mean it has to go into your garden. I'm
no, that's
down
true.
From my garden box now.
No, stay on top of it and preach, because that's where I stood for a long time. Was it's a companion, so I have to plant basil in order to get my tomatoes to grow well. I have to plant, like right now, and this is in my head as we speak, I have to put my Brussels sprouts behind my potatoes in order to be successful. That's what I think in my head. That may not be true, but that's what I'm thinking. And I want, after this year, because I am going to do it again this year, I want to kind of move around. And I may do another bed of Brussels sprouts. Like I may do 2 beds this year to kind of see how that works out, because I'm curious and I want to know. I want to know which is going to be better for us. Which one's going to be more successful. I'm going to keep in mind, and I'm going to use the same deduction that I use here for all the other ones. And it's like, okay, well, what does this and uses that, and pest here, pest there? What was there the season before? Where can I put this? So, and I'm also taking chance this year. And I mean, to be exact, I've got in a bed, I've got lettuce and rutabaga in a bed, and I'm going to put corn behind it. Well, let's use our deduction method. What nutrient does lettuce use? Nitrogen. What nutrient does corn love? Nitrogen. So what am I going to do? I'm going to put more nitrogen in that bed to get it up and running. I know that I'm running at a deficit, but I need to figure it out, and I need to do it. And I just don't have a good answer for it, because I did not have a solid plan going into it. But this is the plan that I'm going to go with. So it's not like you have to do it a certain way. It's just, this is the way that I'm going to do it, and hope to God that it works. Yeah.
And then for some, so like me and in my space, all garden spaces are not equal. I was outside and recording a video, and the audio was all ripped up with wind in the front yard. And like seconds later, like the same recording in the backyard. And you think about this, this goes into the fun part no one ever wants to talk about. Think about all of the structures in the backyard that catch that wind.
Yeah.
So it was windy, but far more windy in the front yard, where it's much more open than in the backyard. So same thing applies with sun as well. So I look and say, for that Brussels sprout, that's, in my mind, the way I process that is, it worked for you. You don't want to push the envelope, which you do all the time, but you don't want to push the envelope. You want that success again, so you're going to repeat the thing that you know that finally worked. Because this is not like try it year one, success year one, just copy and paste it. This is struggling on previous years, got it, right? And so I'm team, do it again. So I get it.
I'm team. I mean, look, this is the way I got a finite amount of years on this planet. And in that finite amount of time, I want to get 100% harvest off my Brussels sprouts. And I'm going to find it. And if I got to push, I'm going to push. And I mean, that's how I look at all of this. And I mean, part of it is driven because, we do the podcast and we do the YouTube channels and stuff. But part of it is just my desire to go out and have pride in what I do. I want to go out there and be like, yes, I did it. You know what I mean? I want, like, I always mess with my wife. Like, I came in and I had my first Brussels sprout harvest, right? Remember I posted the pictures and everything?
It's on your profile as a part when you call or I call you. That's the picture that shows up.
Yeah, I got a new one for you. I got to send you. I had put it in the house and I put a bow on it for my wife, right? She didn't say a damn thing. And I was like, we got to stop and we've got to acknowledge this. Like, but they don't understand. She doesn't understand the struggle that I've had with them. Because, she doesn't really do a whole lot in the garden like that. So it's just one of those things. And it's like you want to try and improve upon it every chance you get, every way you can.
Yeah.
And that's what we want to do. So I want to try and do, and we really like Brussels sprouts, just like you said. We love to eat them. So we want to do as much as we can. And, there's a couple parts that I want to do, and we're kind of getting off topic here, but I want more harvest per plant. That's what I want. And I want earlier harvest. So now I need to figure that piece out.
But take Brussels sprouts as an example. So I've struggled. The plants look great until they don't. Right. And so I fought and it's like, I'm telling you, the clock strikes midnight. It feels like at some point in the growing season, everything falls apart for Brussels sprouts. So I convinced myself, and I'm trying to go back in my memory now. I resisted the urge to pick up some transplants for Brussels sprouts because something tells me that it's one of two things. Either I'm not giving it enough fertilizer, right? Throwback to an episode a couple of weeks ago, which it could be both things. Or while my extension service says, sure, you can grow Brussels sprouts starting in the spring, they may prefer being, again, it's warmer in the summer, but maturing in the cooler weather.
Yes.
Right? And so I looked, and the Farmer's Almanac has Brussels sprouts as an example. The last time I should plant them is like the end of July, which we know from our experience, that means that the harvest should be ready in the fall, right?
Right.
And so, again, I look at that and say, gosh, it would be great to have both spring and fall harvested Brussels sprouts, right? And so is there an opportunity for that? And if so, what do I put in between, right? Now, again, that's not been my truth, but this is what we're talking about. And some of this kind of ties into seasonal eating as well. So when you talk about these plans, what's the one crop you get tired of eating? A good year for me is probably cucumbers. Right. It's like that's something that I just get tired of because a good year it produces a lot. Right. But it doesn't mean I have to have cucumbers produce until, the end of days. Right. So think about if you are in the same position, what do you plant after your cucumber harvest? Right. Because, disease is going to kill my cucumbers every year. It's going to happen. It's just a matter of do I let it or do I get to the plants before the disease gets to them? I don't know, to be quite frank, going into this season even.
Well, and because you know that, you're kind of in a better place.
Because I know that. But then if I had something that I truly wanted to plant after that, that would give me the permission to say, all right, we're done with the cucumbers.
Yeah, I was looking on my chart that I made here. If you want a seed starting chart for yourself, there's an email address below. You can email me for Brussels sprouts. And I was just thinking, because you were like, I want to get it in, spring and fall. And I was looking to see, and they do not recommend planting them in the spring here. That being said, I may plant some in January next year to get spring harvest. I don't know. I got to figure it out because it's just one of those things. For some reason, it's just my arch nemesis. But the question becomes, what do you plant after the Brussels sprouts, right? They sat in the ground from August, September, October, November, December, January, February. 7 months they sat in the ground. That's a long time. And to be frank, that's too long. I did something wrong from the bee in the ground. They're supposed to be a 90 to 100 day crop. So if that's the case, like I put squash behind them this year. And that's just kind of me figuring this whole thing out yet again. I know from experience, if you give squash too much nitrogen, it will only produce leaves and not fruits. So I know that. But I also know towards the end, I was trying to fatten up these Brussels sprouts. So I was pumping nutrients to them constantly. So it's kind of this whole working progress of like, what's left in the soil, this, that, and the other. So we'll find out. It's just one of those things where it's like each year, you got to focus on something. And I like to focus on a number of things each year. I like to focus on certain crops. And then I also like to focus on certain techniques. And, and planting is a big technique that I don't think I'll ever stop trying to figure. I think I will get my combinations down to where this is what I like to put behind this, that, and the other. but there's going to be a point where it's like, you've got to make a decision and you've got to figure it out, because once you figure out one combination, that opens up the space for other combinations to open up. You know, like, what do you plant before your collard greens?
Nothing. That's going to be the first crop in my garden.
Okay. And then it stays all year.
It stays all year.
So what goes in, what was it where your collard greens are this year? What was there last year? Please don't say collard greens.
Peppers.
Okay. So I think
peppers and tomatoes, because guess what? Collard greens are going into 2 spaces this year.
So, and to me, using this method, that makes sense to me, right? Like on paper, it makes sense. Now, you're always going to have outliers too.
Yeah. I think on paper it makes sense. I think it's I was at a garden center today and I mentioned my trouble with brassicas, and the lady said, "What?" And I don't know that she does. I mean, this is her business. Like, she owns the little garden center. So maybe she doesn't grow, or maybe we've just taken this technical term and put it on the internet, and all of us internet folks are saying it, and she's like, "We never call her brassicas." I don't know, maybe if I'd have said cold crop, she may have immediately connected to it. But anyway, I look at it and I say, gosh, I want to grow like all of them, you know? And so I look at it and say, I don't have space to grow all of them, and then everything else I want to grow. So a good question is, what goes in after my broccoli comes out? You know, and so I look at that, and I got to pull up the planner app to figure out what I decided to put in for broccoli. You know what the logic I did with the broccoli is? I planted my broccoli in spaces that had other crops that are more longer in the season. And so I'm giving those other crops that are now left in this space time to kind of spread their wings, you know, so they're kind of intensely planted until I pull that broccoli out. I only did a half a dozen of broccoli, you know, only did a 6-pack.
Yeah, so I've got on my planner app, I've got, let me see here. I've got a whole bunch of things. I've got like gardens summer 2024 and then gardens spring 2024. And that way I can go and I can, you know, click back and forth. I wish there was a button that I could click and I could create like 3, so I could just like click it real quick and then it'd flash over to it, like switch to that like different profile. Yeah, toggle over to it, because then I could like visually see, like, because a lot of times, like, the way my mind works is I'll look at all of it and I'll look at sections and then just go back and forth real quick. But because I'm planting, and I say I grow year round, and I do grow year round, but I plant 3 seasons out of the year. Winter is just holding over. I'm not really doing a whole lot of planting in the winter, but all those things kind of, when they come in, and like, I'm looking at it now and I've already messed up. I planted wrong. Son of a gun. I shouldn't have looked. That's okay. So what I did is I accidentally swapped my peppers and my zucchini bed, but that's okay. And but you know, doing that, you can tell real quick, like, I switch over and I'm like, just like you are right now, what's growing here, okay, and what's growing there. So it kind of works. Now in the season, it's not a big deal because I know what's in my sweet potato bed, my future sweet potato bed. But
remember what I did for the 2024 garden plan has basically, I color coded it to represent each season for the beds. So spring is yellow, you know, summer is green, fall is brown. So I basically line those beds up. Like the cage baby is that the first row is all yellow. If I'm going to plant something in spring there, I plant something in spring there. The next row is all green and so on.
You don't have it pulled up on your computer, do you? Yeah,
I have it. And so I did that because I needed to be able to see across the seasons. That was really important to me. And then now, again, 2025, I'll still have to figure out the best way to, again, kind of toggle back and forth. But it also gave me an idea to help me start thinking about how do you know, sweet potatoes is a good example. So what do I put in after sweet potatoes? For me, nothing. right? You know, I put nothing there because my sweet potatoes are going to come out at the frost, right? They're down here in that corner here. But I should be able to put, because I'm not planting mine until June in Chicago, I should be able to have some spring plants in there in advance. So here's my spring row, here's my summer row, here's my winter row.
Oh man, your garden is confusing me, but I get it now.
Yeah, but it absolutely works for me and I love it. There are a couple of notes here, like if I planted the onions in the spring and I don't expect to harvest them until summer.
Can you zoom in?
Yeah, sure. If I don't expect to harvest them until summer, I don't want them to appear here again, because that crop is just basically going to cross over. So a couple of these are like, oh, I wanted to do one thing and decided to do another. So this is a good example. The first bed in the cage, baby, and I'll just talk this through for y'all real quick, has broccoli in here and then onions. It's a like 36-inch wide space, 7 foot long. And so I should comfortably be able to fit both of those crops in there. And then I know I'm going to harvest the broccoli like first, second week at the latest of June. And so afterwards, guess what's returning to the cage, baby? You know it, people. I have 2 tomato plants there. The onions are still going to be there in June. And I think I have here an eggplant as an example, right? So in that space, that's going to be perfect if all 3 do well. Yeah. And I look at that and say, what's next? So that's my summer planting. What's after that? This is the test of Batavia as a gardener. So these are cherry tomatoes that I have here. And for me, cherry tomatoes peter out at some point, like maybe even earlier than the Romas or right around the time, you know, your paste tomatoes, your determinate tomatoes peter out. So do I plant anything there for fall or not? This is the cage, baby, and this is the first bed that's behind the back porch. It sits, you know, behind the back porch. So it's going to be it gets shady it's the first bed to get shady as the sun gets lower.
Why do you have so few sweet potatoes in that bed?
Oh, that's just for my visual. I'm just going to do like 2 rows of it.
Okay.
So I don't always use it to say, all right, because I'm only doing sweet potatoes there. Like I'll do probably this number of slips. What's that? Like 7 slips or something? That's probably all I'll do in a 7 by 4 foot bed, 4 foot-ish.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Maybe
we do
8.
Totally
maybe I'll
different.
do 2, 4, 6, 8.
In a 7 by 4 foot bed, I'd put 28 in there.
Really?
Oh, yeah. 100%.
Huh.
Yeah, 1 foot square spacing. Yeah. For sweet potatoes, absolutely. Maybe 25, or I'd split the different, whatever, you know, figure it out. I'd give maybe a little bit more, but yeah, I'd put a lot more in.
Yeah, so this isn't the episode for it.
No, this is not the episode for that. Well, we can dive into that another time. You know, spacing is another one too. When it comes, so spacing is a big issue. And that's why we like this platform so much, is because it does, you know, it breaks it down. You can see the spacing of it. But when you put the plants in the ground, it's a little bit different.
Yeah.
And I will say, when you're going and you're planting something behind, it's the spacing is part of it too, because we also want to think about root spacing too. What's below the ground? So, like, I'm looking at your onion bed here, or the beds with onions in them, and I'm thinking, like, yeah, there's a lot of onions in there, but they take up no room as far as roots go. So that means that there's just a lot of soil around that's undisturbed. And what is your opinion on this? Before we get to the question of the day, what is your opinion on, if those roots are right under the onions, do you think that means there's more nutrients left in the soil than if they're, the roots were spreading out like a tomato bed or something?
I think they are, but I don't know that I'm right.
I agree with you on both sides of that. I think there are, but I don't know if I'm right either. But I mean, it makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Like if there's nothing there, it makes sense.
And that's one of the things. They're a heavy feeder. That sounds great, but how far out are they going to feed?
Yeah. Man, I might have to adopt your gardening. I do not want to go make another plot, but I might have to do that. I like it.
Yeah, it's creating the structure was a lot of like work, because my fingers aren't quick like the young kids are. You know, young Ben, you probably are going to be fine. But the key here is
mine are as arthritic as yours.
This is the structure. So I'm going to copy this plan for next year.
Yeah.
And, you know, and then start over with the vegetables, right? You know, so the gray represents, just real quick, now I'm showing off now. That's the concrete patio in the backyard. And then up here, that's the front yard. But anyway, I'm going to stop sharing so we can get to the question of the day.
Yeah, get to the question. Who cares about your garden? Gosh.
Leonard, aren't you supposed to be keeping us on track?
All right. So our question of the day is, actually, before we do our question of the day, go buy some seeds from our store down below. Trust me, you'll love them. They're all direct sowable for now. I can't remember if we answered this yet or not, but I'm going to read it, and if we answered it, just let me know. It's from Rhea. And it says, what are your thoughts on intercropping and high density growing? It seems to be all the rage on Instagram, but it seems like you could easily overcrowd your plants.
So 2 things. 1, I would absolutely remember the name Rhea. Hey, Rhea. Love it. Love it. Love it. Love it. 2, I would remember that question as well. So like someone's going to like leave a comment. You answered this question on this episode. No, I don't think we answered it.
I don't think we did either.
I feel like I, out of greed, you know, intensively plant in my garden. I feel like I squeeze things in. Sometimes I describe it when I talk about my garden and share it with other people as I overcrowd things. And someone commented once and said, well, why do you do that? And I'm like, I don't know. I can't control myself. So I mean, I think that there is absolute logic to it. I think that it helps with, you know, managing weeds, right? Less sunlight. I think that there are crops where it works really well. I think there are crops where you're asking for trouble. You know, so, and I'm saying that to say like airflow, you know, tomatoes are crops, unless you're really pruning them, that, you know, I would look to say that's something that you're going to be intensively planting. My opinion.
Yeah. So, well, first of all, if you don't know what intercropping is, first of all, episode inbound, more than likely, because I've been intercropping for a long time. It's basically where you're just planting 2 or more crops and very close to each other. And I use it interchangeably with succession, kind of. I said this like where I'll plant my lettuce underneath my tomatoes, and it confused Batavia, where it was like the tomatoes are growing. Years. I start the lettuce underneath where the tomatoes are growing, meaning in the shade of them, and then when the tomatoes are going to pull up, and I've got lettuce there. So I've been doing it for a while. It's funny how these things, like every year, we got to keep our eye open, Batavia and Leonard.
Demands something new to be the thing. Yeah. Yeah,
the thing for the year. I mean, I think we've gotten over the cucamelons of 2022. Was it? But I agree with Batavia. It's a way to maximize your patterns of your growth, you know, your garden. But you got to understand the way plants grow. You know, I use the example lettuce underneath tomatoes. That's because lettuce doesn't get giant. You know, you wouldn't want to put something like cabbage underneath tomatoes or a squash underneath a tomato or something like that, because they would just overtake each other. So it does take a little bit of finagling and kind of figuring to do, but it's a really good way to use a lot of your space, maximize it. And the weed suppression is an important concept. I mean, I like to show on my channel right now, I'm showing a lot because, you know, my beds are pretty packed. My lettuce bed is like, you can't even see the soil in it. So I don't have any weeds. But when I come back and I put my corn in there, guess what's going to come up before the corn grows? The weeds. They're going to pop up. And that's just because the sunlight's going to hit them and stuff like that. So it's a great way to do it. It's almost along the same lines of like square foot gardening, I think. It's just getting more diversity in your garden, which, I mean, and let's call a spade here. It's getting more diversity in your diet from your garden. So I think that's really important. I wouldn't worry about what's a rage on Instagram, but you're right. You can't easily overcrowd your plants, and that's where knowing the growth patterns helps. Yeah. But Go ahead.
Just one quick note. And I think in both of our gardens, it's common for us to plant the same crop in the same space or very similar crops. Like I'll have a bed with kale and collards, and so to be quite frank, I love the way that those intercropped beds, interplanted beds look. I think there's a beauty in it. I think that it invites you to think more diverse when it comes to your plate because you see these things, multiple vegetables in the same place. I prefer in a lot of cases to grow the same thing in the same space because it helps me stay disciplined when it comes to managing those things.
Right.
Right. So I think that every gardener is different. Believe it or not, if you see my garden space, you'd think that I have more together than I do. Yeah. I am fighting for my garden life. Before we started recording this episode, I said, hold on, Ben, I have to water this plant. It's the beginning of indoor plants dying, in my home as we get more outside in the garden. But I bring it up to say, I think when you have multiple plants in the same space and in a tight space, you really have to be diligent about making sure those plants are healthy, that you're harvesting on time for those that are, need timely harvest. Like, I think that it's harder to see them, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I mean, I used lettuce and tomato in like this episode. I mean, that's exactly what I did last year as I started the lettuce where the tomatoes were. So it's the same thing we've been talking about. Think about pests and nutrients, think about growth times, think about watering needs and all that stuff, and then put it together and give it a shot. Just get a little bit closer and a little bit closer. And it is like, again, it's very easy to overcrowd. Just like you, I had a comment the other day. Guy was a real ass. I hope you're listening so you can hear this, but I'll probably say it on YouTube too.
That's the dark side of the veil, just in case you guys couldn't hear the difference.
Yeah, this is part of the dark arts. But he writes, you're stupid. You have all that space and you continue to plant so tightly. Why? Well, first of all, because I like to plant that way. And second of all, I like to show that you can plant that way. I could till up my whole yard and have an entire garden out there if I want, but I want to go out there and throw the Frisbee with my son. I like a little bit of grass, not a lot of grass, but these are all parts of it. And being able to show that and do that is kind of like what I decided is my mission. And it's possible to take a 4x8 bed and grow a lot of food out of that 4x8 bed. You just have to know how to do it and just take these steps year by year, season by season, and plant them. And once we do that, you'll start to put it together, just like Rhea's going to do. Now, I hope. I'm sorry, I can't see your picture. You're going to start intercropping. I'm sure you've already made your mind up. And so you're going to start working your way into it slowly but surely. And when you figure it out, it'll be nice. But, don't take everything you see and be like, I got to do it exactly that way. Work into it slowly. Yeah. You'll be happy with it.
Yeah, I am. The future Batavia that's going to pull her tomatoes out earlier is probably going to be the same version of Batavia that does more intercropping, interplanting. If for nothing else, two things. One, I'm so glad that I don't have yet the kind of audience that's just asses like that. Like, oh boy, the part of me I had to turn down when you read that comment or you referenced that comment, because people absolutely talk like that on the internet. And I can't. Anyway, all right, we're not going to go off on that tangent. But the only bright side of that is it's such a good example of the episode. Right. So look at all that you can get out of that space. And you're talking about what, 6 4x8 beds in the greenhouse? Like, I mean, you could do
11.
That's a bigger number than 6. You could do 11. You could do 22. Right. And chances are, depending on who you are, you get the same amount out. That's a lot more space, a lot more expense, a lot more time. I believe managing, I'm just throwing out twice that number of beds. So yeah, this isn't a farm, man. Like a farm where you got a tractor. You know what I mean? I mean, we're a working farm here, but it's not anything crazy. So you can get more out of your beds.
And I like it when, like I go out there and look at my lettuce bed right now and it's packed to the gills, and I like it. I like not being able to see the soil and the success of it and stuff like that. So, give it a shot, see what you think. Like she said, though, be careful not to overcrowd, and just understand when you're intercropping, generally speaking, the idea is one's getting started when another one's finishing up. That's kind of the thought process that I've used. Yeah. So a month before your tomatoes are going to finish, get your lettuce in the ground, and then you'll be getting it. So
Leonard wrote to us to make sure to tell Rhea, harvest often as well. That can help with the potential overcrowding.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. You can make space by simply cutting some of the plants.
Mm-hmm. I gave that note to Leonard. I'm absolutely taking the credit.
Yeah, you are. You are. I'll give it to you. We'll give it to you. All right, everybody. That being said, buy some seeds, become a subscriber, start intercropping, and think about what you're planting behind a certain crop. Have no idea how that title is going to turn out. There's no good way to say it, but thank you for being here with us. Thank you for continuing on this journey and supporting us. As we get into the garden season, stay tuned. We're going to get you through it. We're going to get ourselves through it, and it's going to be amazing. So on that note, we're going to continue to learn to grow and grow for change.
I want to say let's go, but I'm also going to say see ya.
Now you know why people feel like celebrating at harvest time.
All over the world, people have feasting and good times when the crops have been gathered in.
Thanks for checking out the show. If you like what we're doing and you'd like to support us, you can become a patron at patreon.com/backyardgardens, or you can be an Apple subscriber, and in both of those, you'll get an extra episode every month. You can also make a one-time PayPal donation with the link below, and you can get all kinds of gardening gear like t-shirts and mugs and cups from the link below at Teespring, and we have an Amazon store which has all the products that we use and recommend in our gardens, and it helps support our show. And we also add to this list periodically, so be sure to check it out periodically to see if there's anything that you need for your garden. Everything that you do, including a like and a subscribe and even a review, will help us learn to grow and grow for change.
See ya.